Disclaimer, this is all my opinion. If you like games that I don't, then good for you. I am just here to entertain you. With the recent release of Spider-Man 2, aka the most hyped up game of the year, I thought it best to dive into a subgenre of video games not often explored: superhero video games. There have been hundreds of games based around superheroes like the infamous games or Superman 64, and some are pretty good, but others are terrible, and some are trapped in the middle, neither good nor bad. Today I decided to pick out those games and point them out and why they belong in their respective areas. Why? Good question.
How about I leave you alone with this guy instead?
Welcome to or welcome back to my channel. Superhero video games like Infamous Second Son or Spider-Man are some of my favorite video games of all time, while games like Marvel's Avengers are quite the opposite. I hope you enjoy this one, but I won't pressure you into subscribing to me if you don't want to. Although it would be nice. All I want is for you to enjoy my content. Let's hope you do. Enjoy! Superhero games have been around since the 70s, with the very first game being Superman on the Atari 2600. This was peak gaming. I'm joking, obviously. Now, superheroes didn't break into a new mold in gaming until the 21st century. We had plenty of licensed games, like the few games based off of the MCU's Phase 1. I plan to play the Sega Iron Man games another time, but you already know where this is going. In 2009, Rocksteady Games gave us one of the most well-received superhero games, Arkham Asylum. Asylum changed the formula for these kinds of games. Well, not at first, but it made a foundation for it. And well, most of the Arkham games are pretty good. Most of them. While I loved City, I personally believe most developers should look to Asylum instead when it comes to making a superhero game. Asylum is an open world, but it gives the player areas to explore on the island of Arkham. City improved on a lot of things, but Asylum is the foundation of superhero games at large. Sure, it doesn't have alternate costumes, nor did it have a very long story, but this is still what most superhero games should base themselves on. And yes, we can talk about City. Arkham City is one of the best superhero games ever, and one of the best games I personally have played. And you might be asking why. Well, for one, it had an open world that wasn't too big, but still allowed players to explore. And it had DLC, alternate costumes, alternate playable characters, you name it. In only 2011, we had all of this. In modern day, you have to pay for all that. That's pretty damn cool. Origins of Night are also pretty cool in some areas, but even though I didn't grow up then, I still find City to have this nostalgia charm to it. Weird, huh? Another game series that's on par with the Arkham games is the Insomniac Spider-Man series. While Marvel games are usually a hit or a miss, so far Insomniac has given us 3 hits in a row. I'll make this brief. The first game had amazing web swinging mechanics, a great story, a hell of a ton of alternate costumes, and even DLC, so, you know, basic stuff. Then in 2020, we got a spin-off Miles Morales. And no, this game isn't glorified DLC. has a story about half the length of the first game, but it has its own costumes, a lot of post-game content, and Miles' swinging animations and mechanics are different enough from Peter to the point where it feels like a different character entirely. Which it is. And Spider-Man 2 is one of the best games of all time. I won't say anything about the game to avoid spoilers, but I will say the only real negative I had was bits of the story. But to be fair, I have that with most superhero games. That's about it. But here's the thing, everyone always talks about Arkham or these games. Let's change that up a bit. There have been plenty of other superhero games that are usually overshadowed by the Arkham games for some reason, like Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions or Spider-Man Edge of Time. People usually focus too much on the Insomniac series that older Spider-Man games are forgotten. While neither of these games had an open world, neither lacked good gameplay, a surprising amount of costumes, and a pretty good story. Shattered Dimensions usually gets more attention than Edge of Time, since it's a Spider-Verse story that happened prior to both the comic and the movies. However, Edge of Time has, in recent years, been recognized as a pretty good sequel, featuring both Peter and Miguel O'Hara. And, well, it's a time travel story, so I can see why it got neglected. PS3 games deserve better, man. Speaking of which, we've mostly talked about DC and Marvel now, but how about we talk about something unique? Infamous. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. If you're part of the latter, let me explain. In the same year Asylum released, 2009, we got 2 superhero games that both, for the most part, flew under the radar for a few years before resurging in popularity, and then disappearing again. Yikes. Those games were Infamous and Prototype. We'll talk about Prototype later. Infamous decided to combine multiple mechanics into one game. The biggest one is the karma system, and depending on the karma, good or bad, you get different endings and dialogue. Pretty cool, right? Personally, I never actually played the first 2 games, although I would definitely do so if I could. Maybe I'd make a gaming channel for it. Back to Infamous. Another big difference is the story. You might expect it to be some hero fighting a big bad, but the thing is, it's completely different from that. While it does serve as an origin story for Cole MacGrath, you're mostly on your own for the majority of the games. Yeah, your karma changes the story, but the government doesn't exactly like you at all. I mean, in this universe, superheroes aren't a thing. They're all just people with powers, good or bad. Yes, this game is inspired by and based on superheroes, but it uniquely portrays them. The same thing goes for the second game. I won't spoil anything from the clips I've seen on YouTube because personally, I want people to experience the games themselves, even though I myself have yet to. Well, sort of. Infamous Second Son is the only game I played in the series, and it is, pardon my French, dang cool. You play as a new protagonist, Delsin Rowe, while also using new powers. And it's genuinely so fun to play. You bash people into oblivion, and you also have the entirety of Seattle to explore. And for a 2014 game, the story rocks, the graphics aren't half bad, and the gameplay is terrific, beautiful, amazing. I won't spoil anything, mostly because I have yet to beat the game, but I love this game. I'm telling you, you need to play this. Awesomeness personified. Although the karma system is a little dated. Now, I was going to talk about Prototype, but I don't know anything about the games aside from a little thing here and there. And I don't want to talk about something I know nothing about. At least with Infamous, I played one of the games. I barely played anything in Prototype. I've seen gameplay of it, yeah, and it does remind me of Venom and Ultimate Spider-Man. Oh yeah, let's talk about more licensed games, but briefly. Games like Ultimate Spider-Man are interesting. I never played it, but it's one of the few games where you can actually play as Venom, so there's that. There's also Deadpool, a game made by the same people who made the Cybertron games, and while the gameplay is alright, the game and story fits Deadpool very well. From what I've heard, Batman Begins is a surprisingly good movie tie-in. Before Arkham Asylum, it was a pretty good Batman game, which you don't usually see. Speaking of those, Spider-Man 2 on the PS2 was remembered fondly by many, as the web swinging mechanic was surprisingly decent, and that's all I can recall. Hey, that rhymed. Oh, and Iron Man VR looks fun, I guess. So overall, there's a ton of good superhero games, but there's also bad ones. Very bad ones. You already saw the thumbnail. Marvel's Avengers, up until the Definitive Edition, was one of the worst games based around a superhero. Well, multiple superheroes. The game was littered with microtransactions for cosmetic, very limited story content, a restrictive gameplay setting, and of course, barely any post-launch content. After the Black Panther story expansion, which was surprisingly good, there were no more expansions for new heroes. Seriously, Female Thor, Spider-Man, Winter Soldier, etc. had absolutely no story content. There were also a ton of promises that they decided not to keep, like adding Captain Marvel. Great. Just fantastic. Also, why does Taskmaster look like a cosplayer? Seriously, why? Why does he look like this? If they gave this game more time in the oven, they might not have had to shut it down so early, only 3 years after release. But they forgot to preheat the oven, took out the game, dropped it on the floor, picked up only half of it, and then left the rest to rot, and went, "Dinner is served!" And then they were arrested for poisoning their whole player base. Weird metaphor, I know, but you get the idea. Maybe. Oh, and don't think DC is left off the hook. Remember Superman 64? Yeah, the worst game I've ever seen. I'm not exaggerating. In preparation for this video, I decided to watch gameplay of this thing, and good God, I wish I didn't. Granted, this game was made at a time when superhero games weren't the best, and it was the first 3D Superman game, but holy shit, it is so bad. I blame this on WB mostly for rushing the developers, but it is astounding nonetheless how badly this game ended up being in the final result. Yikes. Remember how I said Spider-Man 2 was incredibly well received and popular? Well, let's throw all that out of the window and say hello to Spider-Man 3.
Hello.
Yup, this is a game. Like its movie counterpart, this game was incredibly mediocre. Unlike its movie counterpart, which people look back upon in a lighter view, this game is still regarded as crap.
I'm going to die!
The graphics somehow look worse. The gameplay is, for whatever reason, better on the PS2 than the PS3. More likely than not, this game went down the same route the Rise of Darkspark went through. It probably had to meet the movie's deadline, so they rushed it into this thing. Probably wasn't as bad as what Darkspark went through, though. That's a story for another time. At least Spider-Man 3 had the symbiote suit, although it was very... Okay, yeah, it looked off. At least when compared to the movie. Moving on. Like before, we'll briefly talk about several bad games to save time, since they aren't all that special. Because they're shit. Remember that one Catwoman movie from 2004? Well, they made a game about it. Enough said. Oh, in 2003, They made a Batman game called Dark Tomorrow that's supposed to be some open world type game, but it ended up being whatever this is. Oh, and then there's Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects. It pits Marvel heroes against EA original characters. No, I'm not kidding. Kinda has me worried for the EA Iron Man game. Not every game based around superheroes is bad, however, they aren't necessarily good either. And that's what we call the category of... I'm probably gonna get a lot of people disagreeing with my takes here. Then again, I'm not really that popular, so I think I'm good. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Gotham Knights. No, not the show that nobody watched. The game. The very mid-game. Back when it was announced, I was pretty hyped for the customization and stuff, and being able to play as 4 different knights, but people were really not hyped for this game. I defended it for a while, up until I got it. And that brings us to today. Gotham Knights is a game. It's a fun time killer, but it has a lot of issues that made me realize that while it wasn't as bad as everyone said it was going to be, it isn't as good as I hoped it would be. In all honesty, Red Hood carries this game hard. Probably because they made him a high school jock. But jokes aside, he's the best knight both in terms of gameplay and story. Tim and Barbara's gameplay is okay, and Nightwing is shit. Jason's gameplay was trash prior to the game's release, but honestly, he's the most fun character to play as. And even though changing your knight barely changes the story and dialogue for the most part, it does change the ending significantly. And Jason seems to be the most canon, if you get what I mean. Okay, back to negatives. None of the costumes are from the comics or any other material aside from the Nightwatch look. Why did they do this? I wish I knew. Half of them aren't even that good. There's also hardly any post-game content, like, at all. There's 3 other side missions. That's it. After you beat those, there was basically nothing to do. The Bat Cycle is fun, though. And some Batmobile, but at least there's no goddamn tanks. Still, this game is not worth a $70 price tag. Hell, I got it on sale on Black Friday. Oh, and Alfred is awesome, as usual. Now, I mentioned that Avengers was absolute crap until the Definitive Edition, or something along those lines. And I mean that, because the Definitive Edition, also known as the final update of the game, is actually quite okay. Well, that's what this category is for. For one, all the microtransactions are gone for good. All the stuff they had for sale and are automatically unlocked, and the challenge cards for certain heroes are no longer locked behind a paywall. Honestly, I truly believe that there would be no need for any of this if the game wasn't made to be live service, because let's face it, that was the biggest mistake this game made. Oh, and every hero is also unlocked. There's still stuff to do for fun, but overall it isn't anything special. If anything, I prefer this over Gotham Knight in some areas. And now it's time to get into the controversial picks. Square Enix made another title other than Avengers, and well, no one remembers it. Guardians of the Galaxy came out in 2021 to surprising reviews from the 5 people who played it. I'm the 5th one, and I'm not hating on the game, I just don't regard it as fantastic. I might get flack for putting it in the same category as Avengers and Knights, but believe me, this game is much higher than both of those in my eyes. But a couple of issues hold it back. For one, the load time after you die on last-gen consoles is so bad. It takes a crazy amount of time. And then there's the combat being unfairly balanced, since you have to command your companions to do literally anything. The costumes are pretty good and the story is kind of fun, but there's a severe lack of good boss fights, especially the final boss, where you just talk to him, I think. And I know people love this game and view it as underrated, but keep in mind that this is my opinion, and you are obligated to yours. I just personally don't really like this game. And yet another controversial take. Web of Shadows.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I get it. I really get it. Some of you love this game. But I have a lot of issues with it that cause it to narrowly miss the good category. While this is some of the best combat in a superhero game, and I really wish Spider-Man 2 had the wall combat, there's a lot of problems. I think the story, while somewhat decent thanks to the morality system, needed more tweaks. And the graphics are... God, they're terrible. Why does Spider-Man mask look glued to his face? Or the rest of his costume? Is it just skin? Why does Venom talk without moving his mouth? And... okay, I'll admit it, the symbiote suit looks badass.
You okay?
I got your birthday present, but then there was this loud noise and...
Everything's fine.
Let's go.
You're gonna be fine. I love my present. I love my present. Venom, get ready for a world of pain.
This is probably the most controversial game I put in here, but my biggest nitpick is probably the fact that only the Wii version of the game had alternate costumes for some reason. Actual bra moment. But the QuickTime events were funny as hell.
Oh God!
Speaking of Spider-Man, let's talk about a couple games featuring him. Now, a game that, without a doubt, belongs in this category is Spider-Man Friend or Foe. Friend or Foe is by far the most mediocre Spider-Man game. Interestingly, it uses Raimi's designs, but that's about it. Pretty mid. Now, you might not remember, but there were amazing Spider-Man games based on the movies. The first game is alright, it isn't anything special, but it's a pretty fun game when you look past the flaws. The story is also, surprisingly enough, fairly decent-ish. It's not perfect though. And then we have the sequel, which on the other hand has very few redeeming features. The story doesn't even have Glenn in it, like at all. It does have more suits than the previous one, but overall it's considerably worse. It's funny how this category is mostly filled with Marvel games, huh? Let's change that with Superman Returns. Superman just does not have good games, which is kind of baffling to me. Like, he's literally the most important superhero in the world, and there's not a single game I can say is spectacular. But the concept of Superman Returns is brilliant. A game where Superman is completely invulnerable and the health bar is actually the city's damage rate. Get the city damaged too much and you lose. Also, you can fly really fast, up to 800 miles per hour, which is over the speed of sound, and the faster you go, the more blurry your screen gets. And there's a stamina meter which you can replenish quickly by getting sunlight in space. All this sounds like a perfect Superman game, right? Unfortunately, that isn't the case here. The perfect concept isn't executed in the best way, and the graphics are awful even for the time. And the final boss is a tornado. I think that proves my point. Only somebody would actually realize how easy it is to use this concept for an actually good game. This final game I did not want to put here, but there's one large factor that puts it here. Marvel's Midnight Suns. Now, everything else in the game is pretty decent, the graphics are okay-ish, the story and characters are fun, especially Deadpool, and the costumes are interesting. The customization in general is pretty good overall, but the one big thing holding it back? The gameplay. No one wants to play a card-based game, let's be honest, let alone one on a next-gen console. Like, this is the type of game you play on your phone when you're bored. And there's so much stuff about this game that I adore, that it makes it a shame when the core gameplay puts it all the way back. At least there's no microtransactions. It's a shame developers don't go the extra mile like Insomniac does today or Rocksteady did. I say did because they haven't released a game in years, and the upcoming Suicide Squad game is not something I've been hyped for even before the trailers. And WB Montreal, who made the excellent Arkham Origins, sadly didn't hit the same mark with Gotham Knights. Overall, superhero games aren't always a hit or miss. Sometimes they get stuck in this weird limbo, and there's plenty of people to blame all around. But we should keep in mind these games take time, and rushing the devs is not the way to go. Ever. I hope that this video was entertaining enough to at least earn a like and even a subscribe from you guys. I am still taking feedback from you guys when it comes to video making though. So what do you guys think about superhero games overall? Do you have a favorite? I hope you enjoyed this one, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Ciao. That's a car squad, by the way.